first let me begin just by thanking Eve, Sam, the Department of Justice for their extraordinary commitment to Olmstead implementation, I think, and the community integration mandate. I think you've heard from Clyde and Beatrice and Eve why that work is so important, and why it's so important to people with disabilities, it's so important to people without disabilities, it's so important to our country. And I want to talk today, and actually I'd like to frame sort of my remarks around something that Eve said, which is the tyranny of low expectations. Because we have a lot of unfinished work in this country to implement the ADA's vision, and in particular to address, to correct the legacy of separation, segregation, isolation, institutionalization of people with disabilities. And one of the ways the ADA addresses that work is to say that public systems, public agencies at all levels of government should serve people with disabilities in the most integrated setting. So most integrated setting is kind of the relevant legal language. And it says that public entities, state, local governments, there's an analogous requirement of the federal government under Section 504, should conduct all their programs, services, and activities in the most integrated setting. But what does that mean? What is the most integrated setting appropriate for people with disabilities? And for society, which in the past has had very low expectations, there's been kind of a need to work on the understanding of what community integration should be. And I think, as other people said, really the ideal here is people with disabilities live lives like people without disabilities. That's integration, and that is ending segregation. And we've talked about the importance of jobs and a place to call your own a home, and of really being engaged in community life, family, friends, social, recreational activities. I mean, people with disabilities want the same things as people without disabilities. Yes, they have disabilities, which some of them are fairly severe impairments, but we know now, we have enough experience after many decades, that we can support people with disabilities in living lives like people without disabilities. The question kind of is, will we make that commitment to do so? So, because it is kind of an active and now sort of immediate and increasingly important question, what is the most integrated setting? What is the vision, an appropriate vision of community integration? Can people with really serious disabilities live like people without disabilities? The disability community kind of came together and developed a consensus statement on the matter. And it's short, it's sweet, it's one page, it's in your materials. You can read along while I talk. You can probably be done with the whole thing before I'm done talking. And I think it's an important document, I think, for two reasons. It's entitled Community Integration for People with Disabilities, Key Principles. I mean, one, it reflects the views of the disability community. Every major disability organization, or virtually every, probably every, has signed on to it and embraced the principles. And I'll speak about some of the signatories, some of the endorsers in a moment. And I think it's also really important for public policy, because it kind of answers the question, when we are addressing this tyranny of low expectations, when we're reversing this legacy of isolation and segregation, what is it that we should be working for? What is it that people with disabilities want? What is it that people with disabilities are capable of? And the consensus statement is an effort to kind of simply answer that question. So it begins with a general principle, you'll see, that's restating much of what's been said today. Individuals with disabilities should have the opportunity to live like people without disabilities. The key precept in community integration. They should have the opportunity to be employed, have a place to call home, and be engaged in the community with families and friends. And then it goes on and speaks about jobs, employment in particular, and place to call home, which is unsentimentally called housing in this document. So, employment, and it says individuals with disabilities should have the opportunity to be employed in non-segregated, regular workplace. And here, addressing the tyranny of low expectations, virtually all individuals with disabilities can be employed and earn the same wages as people without disabilities. For some people, that will require reasonable accommodations. As Todd pointed out, for some people, it will require more. So it says, when needed for such employment, people with disabilities should have access to supported employment or customized employment. And I think, as some people have mentioned, some of the Department of Justice and private litigation under Olmstead has focused on giving people the opportunity to have regular employment, to have integrated employment, as opposed to more segregated option. So it ends with saying people with disabilities should be afforded options other than sheltered workshop, day treatment, clubhouses, and other segregated programs. So that option needs to be available so people are enabled, have the choice of living like people without disabilities, like the rest of society. And it's an option that needs to be available, because without the option, without the choice, and that is the definition of being isolated, segregated, excluded. On housing, having a place of your own, it also addresses this tyranny of low expectations. We have, as I think many of you know, many people with disabilities in nursing homes, and not just people with physical disabilities, people with intellectual disabilities, and actually the fastest growing population is people with mental health issues, with psychiatric disabilities. And that's really largely because of the lack of our service systems having alternatives for supporting folks living in their own homes in integrated settings. So it makes the statement, the consensus statement, that virtually all individuals with disabilities can live in their own homes with supports. And that precept that people should have the opportunity to live in their own homes has been actually a key factor, a key element of Olmstead agreements that both private litigants and the federal government have entered into, requiring service systems to give people that option to make housing available, scattered throughout the community, usually by rental subsidies, and also then providing supports. And it says, to this end, individuals with disabilities should have access to housing other than group homes, congregate arrangements, and multi-unit buildings or complexes that are primarily for people with disabilities. They should have access to what we call scattered site housing, but basically giving people with disabilities, including those dependent upon public service systems, like Medicaid, like the mental health system, like the DD, the system of services for people with developmental disabilities or intellectual disabilities, giving them the kind of options that the rest of us have for a place to call our own. And I think it's important to remember that much of what we have now in the disability service system is really kind of a holdover or kind of a legacy from prior eras. Sometimes it's only, a prior era may only be 10 or 20 years ago, when we understood, I think, much less or much more imperfectly what it is that people with disabilities wanted, what it is people with disabilities were capable of, and also how to deliver services and support so that we could offer the opportunity to people even with severe disabilities to live like other people, to have regular work, to have their own place, to be actively engaged in the community. And so we have kind of a lot of legacy programs, legacy housing. They were very well intended when they were created. 25 years ago, I spent my time closing institutions and getting people into community congregate settings. We didn't even think of the option of people living in their own home. And it wasn't really a technology, and it was an option people thought of, it wasn't technology that had developed, and that's really all changed. So our systems and our aspirations need to catch up with people with disabilities and with our technology. So the organizations, I'll just briefly mention them, some that are coalitions themselves, the American Association of People with Disabilities, the ARC of the United States, the largest organization, that works on behalf of and includes people with intellectual disability. Easter Seal is the National Alliance of Mental Illness, again, the largest mental health advocacy organization and a member organization. The National Association, and then there are two state associations of state directors that I just want to mention. The National Association of State Directors of Developmental Disability Services, that is the trade association of the public officials appointed by governors who run the disability service systems in their states for people with developmental and intellectual disabilities, and the National Association of State Mental Health Program Directors. So those are the folks who are the state mental health commissioners, the folks who run the public mental health systems in states. The National Council for Community Behavioral Health Care, that's the large national coalition of organizations that provide services in public mental health systems. The National Disability Rights Network, the whole P&A network, National Organization on Disability, a very mainstream organization, Paralyzed Veterans of America. There are 26 in all. I think you'll see a wide number of disabilities represented, but also, as I say, the large and the mainstream disability organizations as well as these associations of public officials. So you might say, if we have so much consensus on this, what's the problem? And actually, we had that problem in the Olmstead case. It was like, community services are better, they're cheaper, everyone agrees they're the way to go. So why exactly do you have to bring a Supreme Court case to get it implemented? And I think there's lots of different answers to that. One, and I think maybe the most important, is this tyranny of low expectations, that it is not widely understood, sometimes even within disability service systems or within the helping professions, that people with disabilities can, with support, live like people without disabilities. There's just a lot of inertia in government as well as in other large enterprises, and so it kind of takes time for things to change. And change is always hard. People have to, we have a community of, we have large bureaucracies, we have private providers, all of them have to change what they're doing. Will they be successful? Will they continue to be able to make money? Change is difficult and sometimes scary, but we're seeing this change. I think occurring. It's just occurring all too slowly, and unfortunately, we've needed a little bit of litigation to push it. I'm hoping that this vision, this one-page vision, will help to educate, I think, the public and public service systems about what are the capacities of people with disabilities and sort of what our aspirations should be, and kind of stated otherwise, what integration or community integration really means and should be. Thanks.